Why exactly did the Cowboys move on from Amari Cooper this offseason? And what's the reasoning behind releasing Lyle Collins? All that and more in this episode of our offseason recap here on the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast
Locked
Network, your
On.
team every day.
Locked on. Locked on. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Check out Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, let's go ahead and just start with this. The Cowboys, not a super eventful offseason. Do you agree or disagree?
I think it depends on how we define eventful. I mean, their inaction as an event, I feel like, has been well documented. And I feel like it's
no action. Is that what you're basically saying?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Inaction is an action. I think, I think it's certainly, it's not any more or less, how do I phrase this? There's no more or less incoming action than there normally is. Where there is a lot more action is the outgoing action, right? Like the Coopers and the Lyle Collins, and obviously those are kind of the headlines of the offseason. So I think it certainly hasn't been a loud, explosive offseason, but it sure as heck hasn't been quiet, especially with the sounds of angry Cowboys fans with their pitchforks and their torches.
Yeah, so today's episode is going to be a full offseason recap of what the Cowboys have done and what they really haven't done. So in case you're just tuning in because you were listening to Locked On Mavericks and now the Mav season's over, maybe you're down on the Rangers who are at 500 here at, early on in the season, and you just want to get a recap of what Dallas is doing on the football field. We are here for you. So we're going to split this up into three segments: free agency, draft, and then other. Let's start with free agency. So the Cowboys did lose several players, including Lyle Collins, who they released, Amari Cooper, who they traded. They lost Randy Gregory in free agency. They lost Cedric Wilson. They lost Connor Williams. And they only signed a couple veterans in Dante Fowler and James Washington. Those are the most notable ones. So where would you like to start with the Cowboys free agent moves?
Well, let's start in the exits first, and then we can kind of go on.
We have an hour to do the show today.
What'd you say?
Do we have an hour to do the show today of all the exits?
I think we've gotten several shows worth of whinging out of the way already. So if you want to go see somebody whinging about all this, certainly go back to our previous episodes. But
what loss hurts the most of all the guys that we listed?
I think the answer is Cooper, but I think it's because it's a position that you took a gamble on trying to replace. I think with the other obvious answer to me would be Lyle Collins. But I think you feel at least decent about Terrence Steele coming back, potentially taking another step this year, and then being fine at the right tackle spot. You worry about the depth overall at tackle, obviously, but I think as far as like how well will they be able to reproduce like wide receiver 2 numbers, then I think that's something that there is that is still a question and is still something that the Cowboys are going to kind of have to solve as they go. It's not like a clear solution that they have yet. I think they have a couple of plans and some contingency plans, but we don't know exactly what plan A is to kind of replace Cooper at this point.
Yeah, I mean, so in case you are just tuning in for the first time in several months, the Cowboys traded Amari Cooper to the Cleveland Browns for, I believe it was like a fifth round pick. Quick swap. The reasoning that the Cowboys had is they were paying Amari Cooper like an elite receiver, and they don't think he necessarily performed like that. They thought his $20 million price tag was just too high. Now, the wide receiver market exploded after the Cowboys traded Amari Cooper. He went from being like the 4th highest paid receiver to the 10th highest paid receiver. And it's only going to go down here in the next couple of months once more receivers get paid. But Jerry Jones actually said, I believe it was yesterday, that they believe CeeDee Lamb is going to be an upgrade as a wide receiver 1 over Amari Cooper. My issue with it is it didn't have to be a one or another. You can have both those guys on the field at the same time. But that's a pretty good way of explaining why the Cowboys decided to move on from Amari.
Yeah, and I just real quick, I would backtrack even a little bit. I would say that if the COVID situation had not happened, and if its effect on the salary cap and the lack of growth had not happened, I think Amari Cooper is still likely to be here. I think if you look at the numbers, the amount of money that they lost on the cap, because of the loss of revenue due to the COVID situation, probably is about what the Cowboys would have paid Cooper. So really, it's that lack of cap space that everyone was expecting to have that ultimately kind of was the death sentence for Cooper on the Cowboys. I think again, kind of going back to what you were saying, I mean, and this is what I've been saying all offseason. Cooper was not number 1 wide receiver last year. I mean, there's just I don't know how you slice it like that. He was. I mean, the targets, the numbers, the emphasis, all of that was on CeeDee Lamb and not Amari Cooper. So the question was, do you want to pay $20 million for a wide receiver 2? I think some people got it caught up in the sense that it's all about how Amari was playing or how he was fitting in. I think it more had to do with the fact is that they didn't necessarily want to play someone who was functioning in the wide receiver 2 role, $20 million a year. So that's ultimately part of the reason, plus the salary cap situation. And I think CeeDee Lamb can step up, can play a little bit more wide receiver 1. I mean, take more targets there, but that's not the replacement. Like what the replacement needs to be is in the who's taking that third rung or that second rung of targets, right? Like who's getting that third level, that second level of targets and looks and that sort of thing. That's where the replacement will come for Cooper this year.
A couple other free agent moves. The Cowboys lost Randy Gregory in free agency to the Broncos. They had a deal agreed on. They actually announced it via Twitter.
Yeah.
But Randy Gregory and his agent decided to go elsewhere after some contract. How do you want to say this?
Some hijinks that we still have not solved that sounded like two petulant children arguing in a room together and deciding I'm taking my ball and going home. And honestly, it sounded like both sides pulled that same move. They both took their individual balls and decided to go home.
The Cowboys did sign Dante Fowler, somebody who played under Dan Quinn in Atlanta, to try to help replace Randy Gregory. They lost Connor Williams, as we mentioned at the top. That was expected. Cedric Wilson got a fairly big deal from Miami. I don't think we weren't expecting Cedric Wilson to be back. The Lyle Collins one is the one I want to touch on really quickly because I think some people are still confused by this one because I thought he played well in the playoff game against the 49ers. He's one of Dak Prescott's best friends, and he was on a relatively cheap contract with no guaranteed money left. Why do you think, kind of now we're 2-3 months removed from that, why do you think the Cowboys decided to make that decision?
I think a lot of it's circumstance. Obviously what happened with the suspension was eye-opening and stupid, and I think there's no way around that. And I, you have to worry about. It's the kind of thing that when you combine some of the other stuff that has been involved with him in the past, where he's made questionable decisions, and you have to worry about his reliability there. And then I think that by itself probably wouldn't be enough, but I have to think that they worry about that hip. Because
which caused him to miss the entire 2020 season.
Yeah, and he came back and played great. I mean, that I think that's certainly not part of it, but I also think that there were several different points where they thought it was going to be one way with the hip, and then it wasn't. I mean, I think the 2020 season is one thing where he was completely unable to work out, or he didn't work out during that offseason before. He came into camp overweight, tried to lose the weight while trying to rehab the hip, and it caused more and more problems. And I think it's just that kind of decision making in general that scared the Cowboys a little bit. And then you juxtapose that to Terrence Steele, right? Steele was the offseason award winner last year for being the guy the most in the building. The jump he took from his rookie year to last year was incredible. I mean, just absolutely unpredictable and frankly shocking to anybody who spent any time watching those 2 seasons, seeing the difference between the player. I tend to think that, that sort of work ethic and, development plan is going to continue to get better for him. And I think for the Cowboys, they felt like if they got out of the contract now, it's not a huge contract, but it was some money. They get out of the contract now, they can split that money up a little bit more. They can get a little bit of relief. They can roll it into next year. We've been getting a lot of questions. What are they going to do with the La'el Collins money? Honestly, I don't know that they're going to do much except maybe sign a veteran wide receiver at some point and then potentially roll all the rest of that money over into next year to try to pay Dak or Diggs or Lamb or any of these other guys that are coming up. So I think that this was more of a long-term move because they had lost faith in Collins off the field, and they felt like they could use the money elsewhere, considering that they had Collins at such a cheap deal.
One more free agent thing I'm going to mention. The Cowboys did bring back several of their own players, including J-Rod Hurst, Malik Hooker, Leighton Vander Esch. I don't know if that one was quite expected. They also franchise tagged Dalton Schultz, their tight end. I'm going to talk about that one in a little bit here. But that was one of the big moves. They don't use the franchise tag very often, but to tag Dalton Schultz at basically $11 million a year was notable. All right, I want to take a quick break before we get to the draft so we can tell you guys about Built Bar and a brand new product that they have. Built Granola Bars are here. Built Granola Bars come in 3 unbelievable flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. If you want to try all 3 flavors, you can get a mixed box right now at built.com. Only 115 calories, 15 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar. Built Granola Bars are going to change and rock your world. Go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com to try the new Built Granola Bars right now. All right. The draft. Landon, we spent a lot of time talking about the draft. The Cowboys value the draft maybe more than any other team in the league. And I would say this is a very needs-based draft. Now, typically, those type of drafts don't work out well, but the Cowboys had a lot of big holes. We knew going into the draft that they needed to grab a offensive guard to fill the Connor Williams spot. They needed to draft a pass rusher to fill the Randy Gregory spot. We know that they needed to find a receiver to fill in the Amari Cooper / Cedric Wilson spot. And they needed to find a tight end to replace Blake Jarwin, who they released in free agency due to an injury. And what do? 4 straight picks. They addressed all those spots. Tyler Smith in the first round, offensive tackle / guard from Tulsa. In the second round, edge rusher Sam Williams from Ole Miss. Third round, wide receiver Jalen Tolbert from South Alabama. And then the fourth round, Jake Ferguson, tight end, Wisconsin. What do you think about the Cowboys draft now that we've got a month removed from it?
Well, I would remind everybody that the saying is do not reach for need, not do not draft for need. Because the thing is that everyone kind of conflates those two things and thinks that anytime that you're drafting for need, that you're violating some sacred code of drafting, which is just not the case. Like everybody drafts for needs, it's just it's trying to balance need and value. That's the key.
Did they reach for need?
Well, I don't think that they did. I mean, I think that I think you can make the arguments that here's my whole thing. That's why I like to get a sense of the whole draft before we talk about reaching and all that sort of thing, because you can maybe make the argument that they reached for Sam Williams. But you could also make the argument that they got a great value in Jalen Tolbert. You know what I'm saying?
Fair enough. That's fair. Yep.
I think if you're talking about an overall value situation, sometimes it's easy to judge a reach or judge a steal, but without kind of calculating in what is actually happening in the moment of the draft, right? Like where the runs are happening and that sort of thing. I think the Cowboys, they definitely went and got their guy at Sam Williams at 56. But I think the fact that Jalen Tolbert made it to them at 88, and then even just as important, I think that Ferguson made it to 129. I think it balanced all the value out. I really like what they did at the top of the draft. I like some of the things they did at the bottom as well, but I think they had a very difficult mandate this year because of all the losses that we just talked about, because of the situation. This is not, again, this is not what the plan looks like, right? Like, this is the plan did not include losing all that cap space, last year, and then having to potentially fill all these holes because of the loss of revenue, the trickle down effect of what that did to everything. I think the Cowboys kind of drafted for need more than they were probably comfortable with, and more than they usually are comfortable with. They didn't kind of do the normal, or at least not to the extent they normally do, of going and getting some free agents to kind of fill the holes so that they can draft a little more freely. They knew that they were going to be going in drafting with some need, and they didn't have an issue. I think it had to do with the way the board was laid out. So I think you get a guy that could come in and play guard for you right away, and then hopefully can develop into tackle and Tyler Smith. That's going to be really the big litmus test for this draft. For Sam Williams, hopefully you can get a guy who comes in and gives you some rotational snaps as a pass rusher throughout the season, with the idea of potentially becoming a starter next year or taking a spot next year. With Tolbert's learning curve is going to have to be pretty short. With all the stuff with Gallup going on, he's going to need to kind of get up and running sooner than later to kind of fill in that hole early. And if he doesn't, then look for the Cowboys to go out and sign a veteran wide receiver. And maybe even if he does, look for them to go out to sign a veteran wide receiver to kind of help them through that early part of the season. And then Jake Ferguson is a guy that I think, comes in as a solid blocker. He's the typical kind of guy that the Cowboys like at tight end, someone who has some developed blocking skills coming into the league, but can use some refinement as a receiver, but has some traits that you like as a receiver. I think he's got some body control, some ability in the red zone to be a good target. And those are the crown jewels. We can talk about the other bottom guys as well, but I think for the guys that they drafted that were drafting for need, I feel like they got guys that can do the jobs that you're asking them to. It's just about seeing how well they actually do once they get into the training camp practices.
Yeah, anybody who's played fantasy football and done a draft before, you guys know what it's like to have a draft fall where the guy that you want just gets picked one or two spots ahead of you in every single round, right? And yeah, you still fill out a team and you still feel your needs, but you just don't feel super great about that. And then there's other drafts where it just falls perfectly. The guy that you want is there at every single round, and you're kind of swimming downstream, right? I think the 2020 draft was like that for the Cowboys, right? CeeDee Lamb falls to you, and then the corner that you are going to consider taking in the first round in Trevon Diggs falls to you in the second round. Like, it just worked out so well. There's drafts like this where the offensive linemen, 3 of them go inside the top 9 picks. Trevor Penning goes inside the top 20 picks. All the receivers, the top 6 receivers, are all gone in the first 18 picks. And it just kind of leaves you with not great options. And it's not like you can say, okay, hey, let's redo the draft. Let's start over. Now that I know that you guys are all going to take these guys, I want to trade up and go get one. No, it doesn't work that way. So I think the Cowboys did their best to do what they could in a bad situation, in a draft that didn't fall right, and in a draft landing that I don't think was particularly good and deep, right? It kind of felt like there was about 12 players in the first round.
This was a solid draft by the Cowboys. It wasn't exceptional. It wasn't great. It was making the most of a bad situation. I think is exactly like what you said. The draft did not fall the way that the Cowboys wanted. The players that they hoped kind of fell through. It just never happened that way. So they did the best they could with the way the draft fell. And I think they came out with a solid draft, a non-exceptional draft. They didn't get anybody that's like, you're just chomping at the bit, like CeeDee Lamb, like you mentioned, I mean, just even Parsons. I think you at least felt like he was one of the most talented players coming out of the draft. So I think and again, guard is not exactly a sexy position for a lot of folks, and so to kind of get that at the top of the draft is not always exciting for everyone. But I do think that they, the talent improvement, and I think this is my overall offseason note. The talent improvement that's going to happen with the Cowboys this year is going to be with their young team. They already had one of the youngest teams in the league. And they have a ton. I mean, what 14 picks or whatever it was 11 picks last year that they had that are still on the team it's gonna be about the jump that a lot of those guys make. And there's a lot of players in the Cowboys roster right now that are in the middle of that rookie year to their second season, where a lot of these players take a lot of jumps. So the improvement for this team is not going to necessarily be immediate additions, whether it be through the draft or the free agency. The improvement of this team is going to be the internal improvement of these younger players getting better, Dak being healthier, which I think is going to be a huge thing as compared to last year. And the improvement of guys like CeeDee Lamb, like Pollard, like Micah Parsons, like Trayvon Diggs, those Oso Digizua. That's going to be the kind of improvement that the Cowboys will see.
Should also mention really quickly, the Cowboys did very well on day 3. Day 3 was a time where they got a lot of value. You mentioned Jake Ferguson. I know a lot of people really liked him. Matt Waletzko, an offensive tackle from North Dakota. I know a lot of people had a lot higher than where he was selected. Damone Clark, a linebacker from LSU. He got picked, I think at least a round later than what a lot of people had him value. Plus your UDFA class. Multiple sites, multiple people ranked it as the number 1 UDFA class. And the Cowboys needed a lot of back end depth. So I do think they did well there. We did shows on basically all of their top UDFAs on all of the draft picks. Make sure you guys go back and listen to those if you missed them. Later, we do have some other news that we should talk about, including some coaches that stayed, some players that are maybe in some trouble. But before we get to that, I want to tell you guys about BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number 1 source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering needs, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. I want to kind of go back to January and February because I don't want to say so many bad things happen with the Cowboys starting in late February and March that we kind of forget about the good things that did happen, right? The Cowboys keeping Kellen Moore, who was one of the 2 finalists for the Miami job, I think was a pretty big upset, but an even bigger upset was Dan Quinn staying. It sounded like Dan Quinn had an offer to take the Denver Broncos job. Actually, we know that's true. It sounds like Chicago wanted him as well, but he decided to stay with the Cowboys for an additional year, maybe with the eye of being the eventual head coach here. But as bad as the rest of the offseason went, keeping both those coordinators was a huge win for the Cowboys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that the Cowboys were looking to in the offseason was what was the brain drain going to be like, losing Kellen Moore and Dan Quinn in one offseason, which was just the assumption that was going to happen. At least losing one of them,
using one, right?
If not both, too. The fact that they were able to bring back both is absolutely enormous, and I think shouldn't be discounted. And I think the fact that they got another year of Kellen Moore with Dak now, again, being healthy is going to be huge for this offense. For Quinn, the opportunity to kind of continue to develop Parsons, to kind of continue to develop some of these younger guys is absolutely enormous when you have, again, we just talked about it. They drafted 11 guys on defense last year that, that they are in critical stages of development right now, like in that huge gap between their rookie year and their sophomore year in the league, and to have Quinn here to kind of keep a level of continuity in the defense to allow these guys to develop, I think that's absolutely enormous. So, that is something that Cowboys fans have kind of forgotten about, and it's old hat. And I think because we had them last year, so it's not as exciting.
It's not an addition, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think we should absolutely consider it to be an addition, because honestly, I had absolutely considered them to be gone at the end of last season. Yeah. I personally thought that both would have been gone.
I almost thought there was no way that Dan Quinn was going to stay. Right, there was just too many teams that wanted him. He did too good of a job last year. And I have a tweet that's up there somewhere about I thought with the Cowboys retaining Dan Quinn, it was the biggest win that they could make this offseason. And it really is, because we saw last year with the amount of injuries that they had. Because remember, DeMarcus Lawrence missed most of last season. Randy Gregory was in and out of the lineup with calf injury, COVID stuff. Micah Parsons was a linebacker at this time of the year. They had injuries in their secondary. Who knows who they were playing at linebacker? And this was a top 5 defense pretty easily. And by the end of the season, it was the reason why they were winning games rather than the offense.
Cowboys Stats is going to yell at me a lot on Twitter for this, but I think that them retaining Quinn was more of a positive than the Cowboys losing Cooper to trade. I really do think he has that sort of effect on this team. So
We'll see.
I'm excited to see him back, and we'll see what happens beyond this year.
And of course, the Dallas Cowboys can never stay out of the news, and sometimes not the great news. But we should also mention Kelvin Joseph, the Cowboys' second-round pick at cornerback from the 2021 draft, who a lot of people were penciling into the starting lineup, was involved in a situation, I believe, was it in Dallas? I think.
Yeah, it was on Greenville Avenue. And if you're from Dallas, you certainly know Greenville. It's where lots of the fun bars, lots of the youth are out hanging out, having some fun, having some drinks. There's arguments, there's fights, and it sounds like what happened is that Joseph was involved with a group of folks that got into an altercation with the guy, an argument, a verbal argument. I don't think it started as anything physical up front. Mm-hmm. That part was on film, or was on video rather, and then later on that night, terribly, it sounds like unfortunately this gentleman was murdered. Was killed by some folks, by some folks in a car that was potentially the same group of folks that Kelvin Joseph had been with earlier in the evening.
Well, and Joseph was in the car. We know that for a fact.
And Joseph was in the car with that same group when allegedly one of the members of that group shot and killed this gentleman. So very extremely serious stuff, and even if Joseph isn't directly involved, like it sounds like it's being implied now, he was there. He was a part of this. He obviously was interviewed by the police. Yep. I think we don't know what the legal ramifications are in Texas. Even if you didn't pull the trigger, if you were in the car with somebody who was part of a drive-by, you can be held legally culpable. You can be charged. We know that eventually Kelvin Joseph did cooperate with the Dallas Police Department. So the thought process might be that his cooperation is what's keeping him from being arrested.
And there was an arrest after Joseph met with the police, which indicates that maybe Joseph told the police what was going on or who was holding the gun,
We haven't heard anything. So the legal side for right now, we haven't heard anything. We don't know if there's any more legal ramifications. There may or may not be. I wouldn't assume that we are completely out of the clear yet until someone tells us that, and that someone with a law degree, hopefully. Yeah. And as far as the off field, the NFL ramifications, it's the NFL and it's Roger Goodell. So really anything could happen. I mean, I think that they have kind of really tampered a lot of the personal conduct suspension stuff. If the Watson situation doesn't tell you anything, so I think there potentially still could be a suspension coming, but I don't think it's guaranteed, and I don't think that we'll know about it until maybe until well into training camp, maybe
not even this year. I would not be surprised if this is a thing that lasts for a while, because my guess is that the NFL is not going to do anything until we get some news on what happened there. If there's a trial or whatever, it seems like they like to let the legal process kind of play out before they get involved.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And it's a murder trial, so it's going to take a while, likely. So we'll see exactly how it all plays out. But for now, Joseph is eligible to play. He's on the team. He's been an active participant in OTAs. But we'll see exactly what that means for his short-term and long-term career.
Okay. I think that's just about everything that happened or notable for the Cowboys offseason. Did we miss anything? They did sign Dorrance Armstrong. We should mention that.
We mentioned there's a lot of stuff we didn't mention, including that on April 29th of 2022, the Cowboys released Seo Olanilua, who was the fullback one, and I'm still not over it. So there's that. We got Ryan Nall, we got Ralston. Okay, we got some other fullbacks, but Seo Olanilua was our fullback, and we lost him.
More importantly, the Cowboys released Greg Zuerlein. I think probably people are more excited about that. And they have kicker competition. Yay! That's the thing I look forward to the most in training camp is kicker competition. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
A couple underrated stuff that we didn't mention, right? They re-signed J-Ron Curse. I think that was an absolutely huge signing, considering how he played for this team last year. They re-signed Brian Anker, who I think I understand he's a punter, but as I was saying, all of last year and in training camp, he's an incredible punter. He's the best punter the Cowboys had in a long, long time.
Since Matt McBride. Yep.
No, yeah. So this is better than McBride. There's a lot of re-signings that they did that Noah Brown, Jeremy Sprinkle, Carlos Watkins, we mentioned Leighton Vander Esch. So they were Dorrance Armstrong was another guy. They were able to kind of re-sign a lot of these guys. I think people need to remember just the sheer volume of free agents that the Cowboys had this offseason. It was incredible. So the fact that they were able to get some of those guys back is good. Obviously at the expense of some of the top end guys, which that's going to be what they're working through this offseason is try to see how they replace guys like Cooper and La'el Collins.
All right. We want to thank you guys for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen. Up later this week, we're going to continue to do our training camp and OTA preview, talking about the Cowboys wide receivers. The Cowboys have an OTA practice actually today and tomorrow, but tomorrow's is open to the media, which means like last week, we're going to get some nuggets kind of coming out of that camp. So we'll make sure we do a recap show on that. So make sure you're downloading the Locked On Cowboys podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders will keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories of the offseason. Follow Locked On NFL every day on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow our show on Twitter at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you guys next time.